The topic, graphing a linear equation of the form y equals mx plus b, will be found in a number of the ALEKS courses. Starting there with Algebra 1, the pi-slice functions and lines. It's also found in geometry, pi-slice lines, and then in Algebra 2 and Precalculus in the pi-slice graphs and functions. This is a really important topic, which is why it shows up in so many of the courses. Y equals mx is just a shortened version of y equals mx plus b. The equation is shortened because the b value is 0, but otherwise it's the same. Let's go ahead and talk about the pieces of this equation, starting with that b value. One way to think about b is the point where you begin on the y-axis. So when you want to graph a line, you go to the y-axis at this b value and plot a point. This point is also known as the y-intercept and has the coordinate 0, b. After you've plotted your first point on the y-axis, we need to move from that point. You can think of the m as how you move from point to point. M represents the slope. That's just the vocabulary for the movement, also known as rise over run. Now, when I say rise, I'm talking about a helicopter. It could go up or down. And then the run, you can move right or left. We're going to use the M and the B to graph the line. So remember that the M is slope and the B is the y-intercept. In other words, B is where we're going to begin on the y-axis, and then the M represents how we're going to move from that point. Using the M and the B, let's graph y equals 2/3 x. The first thing I'm going to do is put a +0 on the end. This is going to help me identify the M and the B. The B value here is 0, and the M is 2/3. The number in front of x is M, and the number at the end is B. Remember that B is where we begin on the y-axis. So the y-axis is this one. So we want to put a point on the y-axis at 0. So if I grab a point, I'm looking there on the y-axis, and I'm going to place that point at 0. So we have a point where we begin. Next, from that point, we need to move. So I'm going to rise 2, run 3. Rise 2, run 3 really means up 2, right 3. So beginning on the y-axis at 0, I'm going to go up 2 and right 3. This is the location of my new point. So up 2, right 3. You can continue moving up 2, right 3 to get additional points. Okay, so I went up 2 over 3. As soon as I have a few points, when I connect those points, I have the line. So this blue line is the graph of y equals 2/3 x. Let's look at a couple more examples where the slope is a whole number or maybe a negative number. To graph y equals -1/2 x, I'm going to again put a +0 on the end. That makes it easier to clearly see the M and the B. In this case, the B value is 0 and the M is -1/2. The number in front of x is your M value. Now, when you have a negative fraction, you have two options. A negative in a fraction, the negative can go in the front, it could go at the top or the bottom. So notice, in the top one, I put the negative in the numerator, and then in the other fraction, I put the negative in the denominator. No matter what, we're going to begin by plotting a point on the y-axis at the B value. So I'm going to put a point on the y-axis at 0. From there, we're going to move. If I use -1/2, that means rise -1, run 2, which is the same thing as saying down 1, right 2. I can continue moving down 1, right 2, rise -1, run 2 as many times as I'd like to plot some additional points. Now, what if we would have instead used m equals 1 over -2? I'd still go to the y-axis at 0 where I begin, but I would rise +1, run -2. I could continue going up 1, left 2, and what you start to notice is it doesn't matter if I use -1 over 2 or 1 over -2, because when I connect the dots, I'll get the same line. The key, one more time there, is when you have a negative fraction, either put the negative with the numerator or the denominator. Let's take a look at one more example. Let's graph y equals -4x. Starting by identifying the m and the b value is 0 and the m is -4. We're going to begin the graph by plotting a point on the y-axis at the b value. So we're looking there on the y-axis and we put the first point at 0. From that point, I will move to plot a new point. Notice that I put the -4 over 1 so that I can see rise over run. This fraction happens to be a negative fraction, so I have several options. I can put the negative in the numerator or in the denominator. If I decide to go with -4 over 1, I begin at 0 and then rise -4, run 1. In other words, down 4 over 1. If I go with 4 over -1, then I'm going to begin at 0 and rise 4, run -1, which means up 4, left 1. Notice it doesn't matter if I used -4 over 1 or 4 over -1, because when I connect the points, I'm going to get the same line. So quick recap. To graph a line, go to the b value on the y-axis, plot a point, and from that point move by rising and running to get your next point.